That night, when LeBron James was crying, nobody saw him. But the phone call he received the next morning would change his life forever. What happened in those crucial hours transformed a broken teenager into the king we know today. Picture this. It's May 2003, and 18-year-old LeBron James sits alone in his small Akron apartment. The weight of the world crushes his shoulders. Tomorrow, he'll declare for the NBA draft, but tonight, he's just a scared kid who grew up without a father, wondering if he's making the biggest mistake of his life. The apartment was sparse: a hand-me-down couch from Gloria's friend, a 13-inch television balanced on a milk crate, and walls so thin you could hear Mrs. Washington's soap operas from next door. LeBron stared at the NBA draft paperwork spread across his coffee table, each form representing a decision that would affect not just his life, but his mother's, his friends', his entire community's future. The silence in that tiny room was deafening. Outside, the streets of Akron whispered the same old stories of broken dreams and missed opportunities. Sirens wailed in the distance. Another Friday night in the projects. LeBron pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway. Hot, angry tears that carried 18 years of questions. 18 years of wondering why he wasn't enough for his own father to stick around. He thought about the recruiting letters scattered across his bedroom floor. Duke, North Carolina, Ohio State. Schools that represented everything his neighborhood kids never dared to dream about. But somehow even the promise of college felt hollow compared to the gaping hole where a father's guidance should have been. The pressure wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about saving his mother Gloria, who had worked double shifts at multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. It was about lifting an entire community that saw him as their golden ticket out of generational poverty. It was about proving that a kid from the projects could become something more than another cautionary tale. But what nobody knew was that across town, someone was making a phone call that would shatter everything LeBron thought he knew about his future. LeBron walked to his bedroom window and stared out at the Elizabeth Park housing projects. Down there, kids were still playing basketball under the flickering streetlights, just like he used to do. Some of those kids were probably dreaming of being him, not knowing that their hero was up here falling apart. He remembered being 8 years old, asking Gloria why all his friends had daddies who came to their games but his didn't. Gloria's face would always get that look, part sadness, part anger, part something else he couldn't identify. "Baby, sometimes people got to make hard choices," she'd say, "but that don't mean they don't love you." But love was supposed to show up, wasn't it? Love was supposed to be there when you scored your first basket, when you won your first championship, when scouts came calling. Love wasn't supposed to be this invisible thing that everyone claimed existed but no one could prove. LeBron pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Maverick Carter, his best friend. Eddie Jackson, his mentor. Coach Drew Joyce. All good men who had stepped up to fill the father-shaped void in his life. But even their love, as genuine as it was, couldn't answer the fundamental question that kept him awake at night. What was so wrong with him that his own father couldn't stay? Hold on, because what happened next will completely change how you see LeBron's journey to greatness. The person making that call wasn't who you'd expect. It wasn't a scout, wasn't a coach, wasn't even someone from the basketball world. It was Mary Johnson, an 82-year-old woman who lived 3 blocks from LeBron's childhood home, and she had something to tell him that would either destroy him completely or forge him into a champion. Mary sat in her weathered rocking chair, the same chair she'd occupied every evening for the past 20 years, watching the neighborhood change around her. She'd seen good kids get swallowed by the streets, and bad kids find redemption in the most unexpected places. But LeBron James was different. From the moment she'd first spotted him as a 7-year-old, walking past her window with a basketball tucked under his arm like it was a lifeline, she'd known he was special. She'd seen him grow from a skinny kid with oversized dreams into this young man carrying everyone's hopes on his back. She'd watched him handle interviews with the poise of someone twice his age, watched him lead his high school team to a state championship, watched him become the face of hope for every kid in Akron who dared to dream bigger than their circumstance. But Mary knew something about LeBron's father that even LeBron didn't know. Something that had been eating at her conscience for 11 years. Ever since that day Anthony McClelland had shown up at her door with tears in his eyes, and a secret that was killing him slowly. 11 years ago, Anthony McClelland had been a broken man standing on Mary's porch in the pouring rain. She'd known his family since he was a child, had watched him grow up just like she was watching LeBron. Anthony had been gifted too, a basketball player with enough talent to earn a scholarship to Ohio State. "Miss Mary," he'd said that night, water dripping from his clothes onto her welcome mat, "I need you to watch out for my boy. I can't be there for him, but I need someone to make sure he's okay." Mary had invited him in, made him coffee, and listened as Anthony told her a story that would haunt her for the next 11 years. A story about gambling debts and dangerous people. A story about threats made against an infant son. A story about a father who had to choose between being present in his child's life and keeping that child alive. "They told me if I ever went near Gloria or the baby again, they'd hurt them both," Anthony had whispered, his hands shaking around the coffee cup. "I owe some very bad people a lot of money, Miss Mary. Money I don't have. The only way to keep my son safe is to stay away from him." Mary had watched Anthony pull out a worn photograph of baby LeBron, his thumb tracing the edge like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "But I'm gonna work every day for the rest of my life to make sure he has everything he needs. I'm gonna save every penny I can, and when he turns 18, when those people can't use him to get to me anymore, I'm gonna find a way to give it to him." And for 11 years, Mary had kept Anthony's secret, while watching LeBron grow up without knowing the truth. As she dialed LeBron's number that morning, her hands trembling with age and nervousness, she knew this conversation would change everything. Anthony had called her the night before from his hospital bed, his voice weak but determined. "Miss Mary, it's time. He's about to make the biggest decision of his life, and he deserves to know the truth. All of it. Even if I don't make it much longer, he needs to know that his daddy loved him enough to disappear." Now, listening to the phone ring on the other end, Mary whispered a prayer for strength. She'd delivered difficult news before: death notifications, cancer diagnoses, the kinds of truths that reshape people's understanding of their world. But this felt different. This felt like she was about to either heal a young man's deepest wound, or tear it open even wide. LeBron almost didn't answer. The number was local, but he didn't recognize it. His phone had been ringing non-stop with reporters, agents, and people wanting pieces of his future. ESPN wanted interviews, Sports Illustrated wanted photo shoots, shoe companies wanted meet everyone, wanted something from the kid from Akron, who might just be the next big thing. But something made him pick up. Maybe it was destiny, maybe it was just curiosity, maybe it was the way the phone seemed to ring with more urgency than the others. His voice was rough from crying, hoarse from the sleepless night he'd spent staring at the ceiling and questioning everything. "LeBron, honey, this is Mary Johnson. You don't know me, but I know you. I live over on Maple Street, and I've been watching you grow up. I need to tell you something about your daddy." The world stopped. LeBron's heart hammered against his ribs, like a caged bird, desperate for freedom. His father was a mystery that had haunted him his entire life. Gloria had always been vague about the details, protecting him from truths she thought were too painful. "He made his choice," was all she'd ever say, her jaw set in that way that meant the conversation was over. Have you ever felt like the weight of everyone's expectations was crushing you? Like every decision you make could either save or destroy the people you love? That's exactly where LeBron found himself that morning when his phone rang. LeBron sank into his couch, still holding the phone to his ear. "Mrs. Johnson, I don't understand. What about my father?" Mary's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd lived long enough to know that some truths couldn't wait any longer. "Baby, I've been keeping a secret for 11 years, and I can't keep it anymore. Not when you're about to make such a big decision about your future." LeBron felt his throat constrict. 11 years. That would take him back to when he was 7, around the time he'd stopped asking Gloria about his father because her answers always made her cry. What kind of secret? The kind that changes everything you think you know about yourself and your family. LeBron stood up, began pacing his small living room. The NBA draft paperwork on his coffee table suddenly seemed insignificant compared to whatever Mary Johnson was about to tell him. "Please, Mrs. Johnson, I need to know. But here's where the story gets absolutely shocking." Mary's voice cracked as she continued. "Your father didn't abandon you, baby. He's been trying to find you for 18 years, but he could, not because he didn't want to, but because he was protecting you from something terrible." LeBron dropped the phone. The device clattered against the floor, but Mary's voice kept coming through the speaker, each word hitting him like physical blows. He sank to his knees, his world tilting on its axis. Everything he'd built his identity around, the anger at being abandoned, the drive to prove he didn't need anyone, The chip on his shoulder that fueled his competitive fire was crumbling in real time. His father hadn't chosen to leave. His father had been forced to leave. LeBron, you still there? I know this is hard, but you need to know the truth before you make this NBA decision. LeBron scrambled for the phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. I'm here, Mrs. Johnson. Please, tell me everything. Your daddy, his name is Anthony McClelland, and honey, he never stopped loving you, not for a single day. He's been putting money away for you, every paycheck for 18 years. He's got an account with $237,000 in it, waiting for the day he could safely give it to you. The numbers swirled in LeBron's head. 247,000. That was more money than his family had ever seen. That was college tuition for him and several of his friends. That was security, stability, the ability to move Gloria out of the projects. That was proof that someone had been thinking about him all these years. But Mrs. Johnson, LeBron's voice was barely a whisper. Why couldn't he give it to me before? Why couldn't he just be there? Mary sighed, the sound carrying 18 years of witnessing a father's anguish. Because when you were a baby, your daddy got himself into some trouble, big trouble. He owed money to some very dangerous people, and they threatened to hurt you and your mama if he didn't stay away. LeBron felt his legs give out. He slumped against the wall trying to process information that was rewriting his entire life story. What kind of trouble? Gambling, honey. Your daddy was young and foolish, thought he could make some quick money playing cards with the wrong people, lost more than he had, and when he couldn't pay, they made it clear that his family would pay the price. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was nothing like what LeBron had imagined. His father wasn't a deadbeat who'd run away from responsibility. He was a man who'd made a terrible mistake and had been paying for it with his heart ever since. And that's when Mary told him something that would change everything about how LeBron saw his journey. Your daddy's been to every one of your high school games, baby. Every single. He sits in the back where you can't see him, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He has newspaper clippings of every article written about you. He knows about your triple doubles, your state championships, your college visits. He knows you better than you think. LeBron felt the walls of his apartment closing in on him. All those games where he'd scanned the crowd, hoping against hope to see a face that looked like his own. All those moments when he'd felt completely alone, even surrounded by teammates and fans. His father had been there, watching, caring, but staying hidden to protect him. The night you scored 25 points against Oak Hill Academy, Mary continued, your daddy called me crying like a baby, said he was so proud he thought his heart might burst, but he also said it was killing him that he couldn't run down to that court and hug you. LeBron was openly sobbing now, 18 years of suppressed grief pouring out of him. Why are you telling me this now, Mrs. Johnson? Why today? Mary's pause stretched for what felt like an eternity. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. Because your daddy is sick, honey, real sick. He's at University Hospital right now, and the doctors, they don't think he has much time left. The phone slipped from LeBron's numb fingers again. Time seemed to freeze as he processed this information. His father was dying. His father, who had loved him from afar for 18 years, who had saved money he couldn't afford to save, who had attended games he couldn't openly attend, was running out of time. And LeBron was on the verge of declaring for the NBA draft, about to embark on a journey that would take him away from Akron, away from any chance of building a relationship with the man who had given him life. LeBron scrambled for the phone again, his vision blurred by tears. Mrs. Johnson, are you still there? I'm here, baby. I'm here. What's wrong with him? How sick is he? Mary's voice broke completely. Liver disease, honey. All those years of working multiple jobs, not taking care of himself, letting the stress eat him alive. It finally caught up with him. He's been in the hospital for 2 weeks, but he made me promise not to tell you unless you were ready to make your NBA decision. He said he didn't want his condition to influence your choice. Even dying, his father was trying to protect him, trying to make sure LeBron's decision about his future was pure, untainted by guilt or obligation. The selflessness of it was overwhelming, but what happened next will shock you to your core. LeBron was already reaching for his keys, his mind racing. The NBA draft declaration could wait. The interviews, the agents, the entire basketball world could wait. For the first time in his life, he had a chance to meet the man who had given him life, who had loved him enough to stay away. But as he headed for the door,
Mary's voice stopped him cold. LeBron, wait. There's something else, something your daddy wanted you to know before you meet him, about why he really stayed away all these years, and about what he's been doing besides saving money. LeBron froze, his hand on the doorknob. What do you mean? Your daddy didn't just disappear, baby. He became someone else, changed his whole life around. Got clean, got a job, got right with God. But more than that, he's been helping other kids. Kids whose daddies made the same mistakes he did. The revelation hit LeBron like a physical force. What kind of help? He volunteers at the community center downtown, has been for 12 years. Teaches kids about making better choices than he did.
Half the boys in this neighborhood have been touched by your daddy's guidance, and they don't even know he's your father. LeBron's worldview was reshaping itself minute by minute. His father wasn't just a man who'd stayed away to protect him. He was a man who'd turned his pain into purpose, who'd used his mistakes to save other kids from making the same ones. The truth Mary revealed would forever change how LeBron understood family, sacrifice, and what it really means to be a father. Your daddy told me something else, LeBron, something about why you're so good at basketball, why you see the court the way you do. What do you mean? He said you got that from him, not just the physical talent, but the way you make everyone around you better. He said that's what real leadership is, making sure everyone on your team has what they need to succeed. And baby, that's exactly what he's been doing with you for 18 years, making sure you had what you needed to succeed, even if it meant he couldn't be there to see it. LeBron felt something shift inside his chest, like a locked door finally opening. Every assist he'd ever made, every time he'd elevated a teammate's game, every moment when he'd chosen to make the right play instead of the flashy one, it was all connected to a father he'd never met but who had somehow passed down his values anyway. Mrs. Johnson, I need to see him. I need to see him right now. I know you do, baby. But there's one more thing. Your daddy made me promise to give you this choice. You can go see him, and he'll be the happiest man alive. But if you do, you'll also learn some things that might change how you see yourself, how you see your future. Or you can make your NBA decision first, start your new life, and maybe come back when you're ready. LeBron stood in his doorway, keys clutched in his hand, facing the biggest decision of his young life. Not the NBA draft, that was just basketball. This was about identity, about legacy, about who he was versus who he thought he was. He thought about all the Father's Day cards he'd never made, all the bring your dad to school days he'd missed, all the times he'd watched other kids get picked up by their fathers after practice, while he waited for Gloria to finish her shift. For 18 years, he'd carried the weight of believing he wasn't worth staying for. But what if the truth was the opposite? What if he'd been so worth protecting that his father had chosen a lifetime of heartbreak to keep him safe? LeBron looked back at the NBA draft paperwork on his coffee table. Tomorrow he could declare and begin the journey to becoming one of the greatest basketball players in history. But today he could become something even more important, a son. Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice steady for the first time all morning. What room is he in? The drive to University Hospital was a blur of emotions and half-formed thoughts. LeBron's mind raced with questions, fears and emotions he'd never experienced. What do you say to a father you've never met? How do you make up for 18 years of missed birthdays, missed games, missed moments? But as he navigated the familiar streets of Akron, LeBron began to see them differently. That corner where he'd learned to dribble with his left hand, his father might have driven past it hundreds of times, wondering if his son was getting better. That playground where he'd played pickup games until dark, his father might have sat in his car across the street, watching from a distance. Every landmark in LeBron's childhood suddenly had a ghost attached to it. The ghost of a father who'd been there all along, invisible but present, loving but distant. LeBron pulled into the hospital parking lot and sat in his car for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. Through the windshield he could see the windows of the third floor. Behind one of those windows was Anthony McClelland, the man who had shaped his life by staying out of it. University Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dream. LeBron had been there before, when Gloria had appendicitis his sophomore year, when his teammate Eddie broke his leg during sectionals. But this time felt different. This time he was walking towards something that would either heal him or break him completely. LeBron stood outside the door for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Inside that room was the man who had shaped his life by staying out of it, the man who had loved him enough to break his own heart every single day. Through the small window in the door, LeBron could see a figure lying in the hospital bed. Even from this angle, even weakened by illness, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same broad shoulders that LeBron had inherited, the same long fingers that were perfect for palming a basket. LeBron raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Once he walked through that door, everything would change. The anger that had driven him, the questions that had haunted him, the image he had of himself as the abandoned son, all of it would have to be rebuilt from scratch. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. He knocked softly. "Come in." The voice was weak, but familiar in a way that defied logic. LeBron stepped inside and saw him, Anthony McClelland, even pale and thin from illness, even wearing a hospital gown instead of the clothes LeBron had imagined. He was unmistakably his father. Anthony looked up from his hospital bed and smiled. It was the smile LeBron had been searching for in crowds his entire life. It was the smile he'd seen in mirrors and wondered where it came from. It was the smile that said, "I know you, I've always known you, and I'm proud of who you've become." Hello, sir. What happened in that hospital room would become the foundation for every decision LeBron James would make for the rest of his career. For the first time in his life, LeBron understood what unconditional love looked like. It looked like a man who worked 3 jobs he hated to save money for a son he couldn't claim. It looked like sitting in the back row of high school basketball games, cheering silently for a kid who didn't even know you existed. It looked like choosing your child's safety over your own happiness. Every single day for 18 years, Anthony struggled to sit up straighter in his bed, and LeBron instinctively moved to help him. The moment their hands touched, the first physical contact between father and son, both men began to cry. "I know you probably have a lot of questions," Anthony said, his voice hoarse but strong. "And I know you probably have a lot of anger. You have every right to be angry with me." LeBron shook his head, surprising himself. "I'm not angry anymore. Mrs. Johnson told me. She told me about the threats, about why you stayed away." Anthony's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to be there so badly, son. Every game, every birthday, every time you probably needed your daddy and he wasn't there. It killed me every single day." They talked for hours. Anthony told him about the newspaper clippings he'd saved, not just from high school, but from middle school, elementary school, even a photo from LeBron's first Little League team that he'd somehow managed to get. He told him about the nights he'd stayed awake worrying when LeBron was injured, about the pride he felt watching his son become everything he'd dreamed he could be. "I remember your first dunk," Anthony said, his eyes lighting up despite his exhaustion. "It was during warm-ups before the Vincent St. Mary game against Buchtel. You were just fooling around, but when you threw it down, the whole gym went quiet for a second. I was sitting way up in the cheap seats, but I wanted to stand up and yell, 'That's my boy.' So bad it hurt." LeBron leaned forward in his chair. "You were there." "I was there for all of them, son. Every game I could make it to. Sometimes I'd have to leave work early and lose pay, but I couldn't miss seeing you play. You were so good, so smart on that court. You had this way of seeing everything that was happening, like you were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers." Anthony reached under his hospital pillow and pulled out a worn manila envelope. "I wrote you letters," he said simply. "Every year on your birthday, every Christmas, every time something big happened in your life. I never sent them, but I kept them. Thought maybe someday." LeBron took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of letters, written in his father's careful handwriting. Letters about first steps, first words, first baskets. Letters about high school championships and recruiting visits. Letters about the pride of watching your son become a man from a distance. About the agony of loving someone you can't touch. LeBron read them through tears. There was one from his 8th birthday. "Happy birthday, LeBron. I drove by the house today and saw all the cars. I'm glad you had a good party. I bought you a present, a new basketball, but I couldn't give it to you. I donated it to the community center instead. Told them it was from an anonymous donor. Maybe you'll play with it someday and not even know it came from your daddy." Another from his junior year. "You scored 36 points tonight against Canton McKinley." The whole crowd was on their feet, but I was sitting way in the back, crying like a baby. Not because I was sad, but because I was so proud I thought my chest might explode. "You're going to be something special, son. Something the world has never seen." But the last letter, dated just a week ago, contained something that would change LeBron's entire philosophy about basketball and legacy. "Son," the letter read, "by the time you read this you'll probably be deciding about the NBA. I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. But I also want you to understand something about the gift you've been given. Your talent isn't just about basketball. It's about being able to change lives, to give hope to kids who look like you, who come from where you come from.
I stayed away so you could be free to be whoever you wanted to be. Now I'm asking you to use that freedom to be someone who lifts others up. I made mistakes that hurt people I loved. Don't let my mistakes define you, but don't forget them either. Use them to be better than I was. Be the father to your children that I couldn't be to you. Be the leader for your community that I couldn't be. Be the voice for the voiceless, the hope for the hopeless. That's your real draft position. Not first pick in the NBA, but first pick to change the world. And son, I know you're going to be the greatest of all time, not just at basketball but at being a man who uses his platform to make things better for everyone else. I love you, I've always loved you, and I'm sorry I couldn't show you that love the way you deserve. But maybe, if you become the man I know you can be, that love will show up in everything you do for the rest of your life. That phone call, that hospital visit, those letters, they didn't just change LeBron James, they created the blueprint for everything he would become. When LeBron declared for the NBA draft 2 weeks later, he wasn't just LeBron James, the basketball prodigy from Akron. He was LeBron James, son of Anthony McClelland, heir to a legacy of sacrifice and unconditional love. He carried with him the understanding that real strength comes from lifting others up, that true leadership means making the hard choices for the people you love. Anthony passed away 3 months after the NBA draft, but not before seeing his son selected first overall by the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was too weak to attend the draft in person, but he watched every minute on television from his hospital bed, Mary Johnson by his side. His final words to LeBron, spoken during their last visit together, were simple but profound. Now show the world what love looks like. And that's exactly what LeBron James has been doing ever since. Every championship he would win, he would dedicate to the man who loved him enough to stay away. Every school he would build, every kid he would help get to college, every time he would stand up for social justice, it would all trace back to that phone call from Mary Johnson, and that meeting in room 3, the I Promise school in Akron. That was Anthony's dream of giving kids the opportunities he never had. LeBron's commitment to never switching teams for personal gain, that was the loyalty his father had shown him, even from a distance. His dedication to being present for his own children, that was the promise he made to Anthony's memory. And that's exactly what LeBron James has been doing ever since. Every time you see him play, every time you see him fight for his community, every time you see him be the father he never had, you're seeing the legacy of a phone call that changed everything. The king was forged not just in the basketball courts of Akron, but in the love of a father who knew that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child is the strength they develop in your absence. But when that absence ends, when love is finally revealed, that's when ordinary people become extraordinary. That's when they become legends. That's when they become kings.